everybody. So I'm going to tell you guys some stories today of my various field experiences from when I was more or less you all's age. I started doing field work when I was an undergrad and did it for a couple years between undergrad and grad school. And I'm just going to talk about some of the different things I did. And because it's Halloween, I'm going to try and tell you some like kind of creepy stories of field biology as much as I can. Okay. So my parents probably should have seen this coming. I have been obsessed with animals as long as I can remember. I think my first word was cat. And so I was always, finding birds' nests and catching snakes and chasing people's pets everywhere. It probably should have been pretty apparent that I was headed in the biological track, even from a very young age. But I didn't really realize it when I was young until I took a biology class in high school. And I was like, this is so cool. Seriously, this is cool. And so I went home and I'm like, Mom, biology is cool. What can I do for a career in biology? And she's like, well, you could be a doctor. And I'm like, no, I don't like people. And she's like, well, you could be a vet. And I'm like, yeah, I could do that, but then I'd have to deal with like injured animals all the time, and maybe that would make me feel sad. She's like, well, you could be a field biologist. And I was like, people do that? So fortunately, I had parents who were pretty understanding about these things. So I actually started volunteering when I was in high school. This is the guy who taught me how to catch birds. His name's Randy Moore. And this is me right after my senior year in high school, going out to catch some birds. I volunteered for a few weeks with this guy, and I was hooked. So as I've had most of you guys in class, but those of you who I haven't had in class, I'm a total bird nerd. Like every example that I give, the answer to every question has something to do with birds. I was really hooked from a pretty young age. I also had an independent streak and a travel bug. Despite the fact that I grew up in California, I decided to go to college in Maine. I moved from California to Maine, and was very fortunate because I ended up at a school where there was a professor who studied birds. I started asking him for advice, and he was like, oh, well, you should go try and do some field work jobs in the summer. And I'm like, oh, okay, that sounds like a great idea. So after my freshman year, I applied to a bunch of jobs, and I actually managed to land a bird job in Goshen, Virginia. So very extreme Western Virginia, kind of in the middle of nowhere. Some of the strongest accents, well, we're going to get to Louisiana later. There were some pretty strong accents there too. But very, very strong accents there. And I was working on a project in the George Washington National Forest. That's the big deciduous expanse of trees here, on gypsy moths. This is a gypsy moth larva up here. And gypsy moths are problematic. They're really big herbivores, and if you get a bad gypsy moth infestation, this is what it does to a forest. So if you have a very serious gypsy moth infestation, it'll pretty much remove all of the leaves from a forest. So it can be very damaging to forests, particularly out in the east where there's a lot of deciduous trees. So people want to try and control them because it makes it unsightly and it damages timber for timber sales, and so people are interested in controlling them. And the main way to control gypsy moths is to fly over the forest that's infested and spray pesticides on it. Now, this of course has other environmental issues with it. And this particular project I was working on, they were comparing the impact of two different types of pesticide treatments. One with a bacterium that infected any lepidopteran, so any moth or butterfly, and would kill them. And one that was a viral spray that targeted only gypsy moths. Okay? And they would fly over these forests and spray this stuff out behind them. And the project that I was working on was an ecosystem-wide project. They were looking at amphibians and birds and mammals and all kinds of different things in these forests that were being sprayed to see what effects the spray was having on the rest of the ecosystem. So I was involved with the bird part. I was out there catching and trying to find the nests of and taking surveys of particular species. This is a red-eyed vireo and a worm-eating warbler. There were two of our focal species. So I spent my days trudging around the woods and trying to find their nests and listening for their calls and trying to get an idea of the population sizes of these birds. Occasionally, I'd be out in the woods, and one of the planes would start spraying the bit of woods that I was in. And this is before the days when people had cell phones, so I couldn't exactly call them off. And I didn't have a car because they'd drop me off in the morning and they'd pick me up in the afternoon. And I was out there by myself in the woods, so I'd be like running up and down the hills trying to escape from the plane. And even though it probably would not have done anything to me, these sprays were specifically targeted to insects. They're not supposed to harm humans. I just didn't want to get sprayed. I also was the low man on the totem pole in this job, so I did a lot of vegetation surveys. I fortunately had learned my East Coast trees in my ecology class that I'd taken. So they're like, oh, you know your trees. Here, do a zillion veg surveys. I'm like, thanks. And I also did all the data entry. I was basically a total workhorse, but it was a pretty cool experience. So I was pretty excited. Okay, so that was my first job. The next summer, I got a job that was a little bit more exciting. The next summer, I was an intern for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in King Salmon, Alaska. This is King Salmon. This is downtown King Salmon. That is basically all there is to King Salmon, Alaska. This is where it's at. It's up here. But I was only in King Salmon for a couple of weeks. The rest of the time, I was at one of these 3 lake systems. This is the Sheriff Lake, Ugashic Lakes, and this little one down here is Mother Goose Lake. These sites are only accessible by float plane. So they load you up in the float plane with 2 weeks worth of food, fly you out to these sites, drop you off. There'd be, a group of us, like 4 or 5 of us, drop us off, and we would be out there doing biology for the next few weeks until they would either come out to pick us up or come out with another 2 weeks worth of food and drop that off. So very, very, very remote. We literally were the only people for like 150 miles. It was pretty cool. So this is Mother Goose Lake. This is our camp at Mother Goose Lake. We had 2 what we call weather ports, which are like a canvas Quonset hut. We actually, this site had a couple of cabins as well. Actually, this is a cabin, and this is a bear stash. It's basically a little cabin on very tall stilts that you can put your food in so that the bears don't get to your food. So I spent a lot of time out there. This is just, the surroundings there. And there we were doing some monitoring of songbirds. So we were trapping and banding songbird species along the edge of the lake here. All right. That was a pretty amazing spot to be. And the nice thing about having the cabin is that because you have a wood cabin that you could go into, were there to be a bear around, and you have the bear stash so your food's up above the ground, we didn't have to have electric fences. We did, however, have to carry guns. So I was trained to use a shotgun, which I carried in case were I to be attacked by a bear. Fortunately, I was never attacked by a bear. Another really cool thing that did happen there is we were sitting on this beach one day, looking out across the lake there, and a moose comes charging out of the brush on the far side of the lake, and it runs into the water about up to here on its leg. It turns around and faces the shore. So we're like, what's this moose doing? So we're looking. A pack of wolves comes out right behind the moose. Spans out along the edge of the shore, and they're looking at the moose, and the moose is like, yeah, you try it. So the moose had its back to the lake, so the wolves couldn't get around behind it. And they looked at the moose for a while, and then they just trotted off towards us, down the edge of the lake. When they got about there, they caught wind of us. They got around, so they were downwind of us. They kind of looked up their noses, and then they turned and headed back into the bushes. But as they were heading back into the bushes, we had our trails marked with little bits of orange flagging. One of the wolves ate a piece of my orange flagging, and then disappeared into the woods. And I'm like, so that's what's happening to the flagging. So we did have a lot of good wildlife sightings out there. So that was one of the places we went. This is the Ugashik Lake site. At Ugashik, we didn't have the cabin and we didn't have a bear stash. So we had to have an electric fence around our campsite in case, keep the bears out in case they smelled our food, something like that. This is how you do laundry in the middle of nowhere. We just turned off the electric fence and then hung our stuff up there to dry. If you get a sunny day, that's the good thing to do. And at this place I was actually doing fishery surveys. So this is this little passage of water between two large lakes, and it's a really good sport fishing place. And so float planes come out, and these guys who paid thousands of dollars to be taken into the backwoods to go fishing would hop out, and they'd go fishing, and if they caught anything, we'd like hop out of the bushes and go, "That looks like a nice fish. Can I measure it?" And so that's what I'm doing there. I'm measuring some fish that some guy caught. So that was an interesting job. That's the only time I've worked with fish in my career, but it was kind of fun. It was a catch and release site, so the guys would catch the fish. We'd measure them. They'd take pictures with their fish, and then they'd put them back. But while we were there, we did have a really scary experience with a rabid fox. This is not the rabid fox. This is just a fox. But one evening we were moving, so we had two of these little Quonset huts here again. We had one that we cooked in and one that we slept in. We were moving from the cooking tent to the sleeping tent. And one of my coworkers was going first. And well, actually no, I and my other coworker had gone first, and we were already getting ready for bed. And he came afterwards, and he was walking in the dark towards the other tent, and a shadow ran out of the night and tried to bite him in the foot. And fortunately, he was wearing really big, heavy leather boots. And he has good reflexes. So he kicked it, and it scampered a little short distance away, and then it came back at him again. And he was carrying the gun, because he was bringing it from the one tent to the other. So he hit it with the butt of the gun, and again, it scampered off. And he's like, "Somebody get out here with a flashlight, I'm being attacked by something." And my other coworker already had her contacts out. So I'm like, okay! So I grab my headlamp, and I grab his headlamp, and I run out, and we're standing out there, and we see this fox like slinking around the edge of the light. And it runs off in one direction. And so he's watching the direction the fox went. I'm standing in the other direction. The fox circles us, comes at us from the other side, and tries to attack us again. At that point, with the headlamp, he was able to see it well enough, and he's a guy who grew up in Alaska and had some experience with shotguns, and he was able to shoot it. But it was really, really scary, because a rabid fox thinks it can eat you. They are not in their right minds, and this is not a very big animal, but when an animal like that thinks it can eat you, it is really scary. So yeah, that was a pretty disturbing experience. And then we had to cut its head off and send it into the state lab to have them test it for rabies, and indeed it did have rabies. Another surefire sign that an animal has rabies, muzzle full of porcupine quills, because they also think they can eat a porcupine. And that doesn't usually end well for the fox. Anyway, okay, so that was interesting. The last place I worked was on the Basharoff Lake. This is Mount Pewit here in the background. And our Basharoff site was in the middle of a blueberry field, 4 miles from a salmon stream. I was there for 3 weeks. There was one day in 3 weeks when I did not see a bear. There were so many bears in this area. It was kind of ridiculous. And so I was staying in a cabin with one of my friends, and because we had this little row cabin, so this was a pretty nice site. Everybody got to sleep in a cabin. It was not tents, so it was a little bit of an upgrade. So in the cabin one morning, we get up, and you have to be kind of careful when you get up and you go to the porta potty, or the outhouse, go to the bathroom in the morning, because not very many people have been around, and there could be bears, and the porta potty's in the middle of this little willow thicket. So we're always kind of cautious. So my friend opens the front door, and she steps out, and then she steps back in. She closes the front door, and she's like, "There's a bear right there." And so she's looking out one window. I go to the other window. I'm looking out. I'm like, "Wow, that's a big bear." And she's like, "I don't know, it kind of looks medium-sized to me." And I'm like, "Is your bear standing on its back legs?" And she's like, "No." There are 2 bears. So we had to wait like half an hour for the bears to leave before we could leave our cabin. But that's also the only place that we actually had to use the shotgun. over the course of the summer. But fortunately, we didn't have to kill a bear. The other things that we had with the shotgun were what we call deterrent rounds. So we had rubber bullets and basically what we call cracker shells, which are basically an M80 that you can shoot out of a shotgun. And we had flares. So we had this bear who was not afraid of us and kept on hanging out by where we were trying to catch birds. And so one day it was really too close to us and not being disturbed by us, so we got out the shotgun and actually shot a couple of the cracker shells at it. And they fly out and then they explode like right by the bear. And he was like, I don't like that. I mean, he like hustle off, but he did eventually leave. But the idea with those deterrent rounds is to make the bears have a negative association with people. Because these are bears that have never seen a person in their life. Most of the time, most of the bears I encountered, I'd see the bear would see me, and I'd go, okay, I'm going to go this way. And the bear would be like, okay, cool. They really weren't very interested in us. We were like not under the food category. You know, we just were, they're like, I don't really know what you are, so I'm going to go over here. Okay, so that was Alaska. That was a pretty dang cool summer. The next summer, I actually worked at the scientific station that my college had. This is my undergraduate thesis advisor. All my bird nerdiness is his fault. Well, maybe not all of it, but a good proportion of my bird nerdiness is his fault. So the Bowdoin College, which is the college I went to, has a scientific station off of the bay, this island here, which is Grand Manan, in the middle of the Bay of Fundy. This is the island from the air. It's about 3 miles long, about a mile wide. We have a lobster friend of the program who will take us out at the beginning of the season on the lobster boat, drop us off on the island. You do biological research for the summer, and then they pick you up. Again, no running water. I showed you how we did laundry in the field with the other one. This is what you do when you don't have a shower. You put shampoo in your hair and then jump in the ocean. This is, mind you, Canada, it's a little cold. So, needless to say, that didn't happen very often. One of the really cool things about the Bay of Fundy, though, is that it has some of the most extreme tides in the world. So the tide will go up and down like 20, 30 feet every day. So it's a really neat place to study marine biology. There were a number of students out there who were studying marine biology. But I'm a bird nerd, so I was studying forest birds. So here I am climbing a tree to check on a nest that I found. And I also helped some of the other students studying birds out there. And so I did some undergraduate research, and I did had a thesis, and I wrote it all up, and it was fun. And so at this point, this is after my junior year of college, I'm like, I like bird research. This is really cool. I want to do more of this, but not right away. So when I graduated, I decided I wasn't going to go to graduate school right away because I had been in school my entire life, and I didn't want to do it right then. So I took 2 years off, and I'm really grateful that I did. Probably one of the best decisions I've made. I got a lot more experience that I wouldn't have gotten otherwise. I had better perspective when I entered graduate school, and I had a better idea of what I wanted to study in graduate school. So after I graduated, I took a series of field jobs. This was the first one. This is Mount Mansfield in Vermont. On Mount Mansfield, we were studying the Bicknell thrush. That's this little plain brown guy here. The Bicknell thrush only lives above 3,000 feet in the Appalachians. There is not very much land above 3,000 feet in the Appalachians. Those mountains are way smaller than our mountains. And so they're relatively threatened. They also winter in the Dominican Republic. So if you know the Dominican Republic, that island is half Dominican Republic and half Haiti. Haiti's been severely deforested, so they probably once lived in Haiti as well, but there's not very much forest remaining there, so they only live in the Dominican Republic now. So they have limited wintering habitat, limited breeding habitat. They probably should be an endangered species, but they're not. But they're kind of a cool little bird. The problem with them is that they are most active in the hour before the sun comes up and the hour after the sun goes down. Now this is Vermont in the summer. The sun comes up at like 4:30 in the morning and it goes down at like 9. So I was severely sleep deprived on this job because we were up at 3, so we could be out the door to catch the birds at 3:30, so we had that half an hour. So I had a lot of very early mornings. Mount Mansfield is also a ski resort, so this is the sunrise behind the chairlift. And these are my compatriots who I worked with and lived with in a very, very small, mouse-infested cinder block building. Needless to say, we were all sleep deprived and grumpy. So I'm like the only one smiling in this picture. I'm probably only smiling because I think it's polite. We were all grumpy. I was about ready to kill them almost all the time. And it was like a one-room shack with these 4 stinky guys, and there were mice, and they could get into the fridge, and they would eat my food that was in the fridge, and it was not my. It was definitely one of the harder jobs I've ever had. Working 90-hour weeks is rough. Trust me. But it was a pretty cool. It was a pretty cool project, and I'm glad I did it. I'm glad I persevered. When I was done with that job, I was very happy to be done with that job, though. But I did persevere, and I stayed for the whole season, which was actually turned out to be a good thing because this guy was going in to start his master's, and he hired me to help run his field station. So that's how I got my next job, which was good because it's hard to find jobs. It's easy to find jobs in the summer if you want to study birds. It's harder to find jobs in the fall and winter. But so I guess I didn't tick him off too much when we were all sleep deprived because he did hire me, and I went to Alabama. So I was working out here where this little red dot is. This is Mobile Bay, southern Alabama, the Gulf Coast. And we were working out at Fort Morgan in coastal scrubs. This is during the migration season. So all the birds in North America are heading south for the winter. And as they're heading south, they run into the Gulf of Mexico, and they go, oh, I got to eat something before I fly across that. So they all stop in this coastal scrub habitat, eat for a couple of days, and then they fly across the Gulf. So we had a whole bunch of nets up there, and we'd catch birds and band them, and it was really cool. And I was actually hired as the official bird bander, which means I handled pretty much every bird that we caught that entire season. We caught 5,000 birds of 98 different species, and it was a really great learning experience. So I learned a ton about handling birds. This is also what you do if you run out of places to put a bird. We have a white-eyed vireo, a Tennessee warbler, and a black and white warbler. They're all fine. That's just how you hold them if you've run. We had like little boxes we could put them in bags, but sometimes we get so many birds that we just didn't have anywhere else to put them, and you end up holding them with. So this was a pretty awesome job. We caught some really cool things. This is a Chuck Will's widow. This guy. Kind of evil-looking little bird. This is one of I figured he was a good Halloween story. Chuck Will's widow is a nocturnal bird. If you guys know what a whippoorwill is, they're related to a whippoorwill. And what they do when you catch them is they will spread their wings and they'll growl and they'll open their mouth really wide. They have like a flip-top head, basically. And so they'll go. And they're really scary. They're completely harmless. They cannot hurt you. There's nothing they can do to you that would hurt you. But they're very, and here he is spreading his wings out over the ground with his mouth open. This is what he's trying to look like. This is a cottonmouth. It's a venomous snake that's very common in the southeast. Very aggressive snake. And when they're threatened, this is what they do. And it's amazing how much these guys' behavior is almost exactly like the behavior of the cottonmouth. So what we think is going on there is that these guys, that's their defense mechanism for when somebody, wants to try and eat them. They're like, I'm poisonous. Very cool little critter. So we caught a few of those guys. I actually made money on that job. I was able to buy a plane ticket to my next job, which was in Brazil. So as I said, I had a serious travel bug. And so I got a job working in the Pantanal, which is this region of western Brazil here. It's a giant floodplain. It's got rivers that are moving through it, and it's completely submerged in water about half of the year. So this is what the habitat looks like. Kind of scattered trees, little patches of rainforest, and a lot of this kind of grassy, flooded wetlands. We actually were out there studying the muscovy duck. This is a muscovy duck. You may be familiar with the domesticated version of the muscovy duck. They are white with a pink face. They're very ugly. I think the wild version is much more handsome. But the way you tell a muscovy duck from another muscovy duck is that they each have a distinctive pattern of warts on their face. So you can see these little red warts on his face there. And we had a deck of cards of all the ducks in the area that were hand-drawn with the pattern of the warts, and they all had names. And so we'd go out into the water and look for these ducks. And when we'd find them, we'd sit down and we did behavioral observation. We also tried to catch them. We were spectacularly unsuccessful at catching them. But fortunately, we could tell them apart by their warts, so we knew who was who. We just couldn't catch them. And so this is actually where we live. This is a ecotourism lodge. I'm putting ecotourism in quotes because they advertise themselves as such, but they have some distinctly not very ecologically friendly habits, such as abducting wild baby birds from their nests and raising them by hand, which is not cool. But I'll show you one of their pet birds that they raise by hand. So we stayed here, and they actually, it was a pretty cool thing because they part of my, I guess you'd call it salary, was that I got fed. So I stay there for free, and then they feed us, and we go off and trudge around looking ducks. So the thing about walking around the swamp looking for ducks is that when you find a duck, I had a little chair that I would bring with me and a spotting scope, and I would want to sit down comfortably on my little chair and observe the duck. Now, optimally, you would find a little island or a little raised bit of land where you could put your little chair and sit on it, so you'd be up out of the water. And I had a problem, which was that every time I'd find a duck, and then I'd find a little bit of raised land that I was going to sit on, there'd be an anaconda on my little bit of raised land. And so I'd be like, so I extend the poles on my tripod as long as I could and poke at the anaconda until it left. And then set up my chair and get my spotting scope. And one time I had done this, and I was watching, and I watched the duck for like 45 minutes, and I was very intently watching the duck. And then I finished my observation, and I looked down, and the anaconda had come back and was curled up underneath my chair. Fortunately, they didn't seem to be terribly interested in me, so I didn't have any unfortunate run-ins with them. The other thing that we did is that muscovy ducks are tree nesting birds, which is unusual for a duck. So we had to do a lot of tree climbing to check into cavities to see if there were nests in the cavities. So we had this nice rope apparatus here so you could climb up trees if necessary. Or occasionally there were trees that you couldn't climb with ropes, and we have slightly more precarious ways of looking into the cavities. But the problem with doing that is that you climb up to your cavity in the rainforest, and you basically have to stick your face in the hole to see what's in there. So sometimes you'd stick your face in there and you'd find a very cute little nest of ducklings, and other times you would find other things. So I found all kinds of things. I found a couple of owls, which, they didn't hurt me, but you have your face in here and all of a sudden you realize you're this far from an owl. That's a little disturbing, and you're suspended from a rope, so there's that. Had bats fly out of my face. I had parrots fly out of my face. There were bees in one of them. So a lot of interesting experiences peeking into tree cavities. Also, trudging through the swamp, you might occasionally run into one of these guys. This is a caiman. And at one point, I was taking a shortcut. I didn't normally take this shortcut because the water was like thigh deep. I would normally go around where it was a little bit shallower, but I was hungry and I wanted to get back for lunch. So I went through the thigh deep area, and I stepped on an approximately 7-foot caiman in thigh deep water. And I think we both near had a heart attack. It went, And I swear I levitated up out of the water and ran across the surface for about 10 meters before I came back down again. But again, no harm done. Just a good scare. One more story about Brazil before we move on. This is Azalau. That means big blue guy in Portuguese. Azalau was raised by the humans of the ecotourism lodge. They stole him from a nest. So they stole him from his real parents and raised him by hand. So he thought he was, actually she thought that she was a human. They thought she was a boy. She wasn't. And Azalau, because she thought she was a human, really wanted to have a mate. And so, of course, the preferred mate would be a human. And she preferred women. Also, by the way, she turned the spigot on. She was very smart. She turned the spigots on, but she didn't turn them off. So you'd have to go around behind her and turn off the spigots. But she would turn them on and get a drink and take a bath. Anyway, so I felt sorry for her because, poor bird, she's confused. So I was nice to her. And so then she decided that we were mates. And she would sit on the back of my chair and, cream my hair. And that was nice. And it went on for a while. It was okay. But then she started, chasing other people who wanted to talk to me. And that was somewhat problematic because I couldn't have, a conversation with a human because she would, get in between us and, try and chase off the human. So I had to break up with her. And she didn't take that very well. And she would find things that were mine and destroy them. So I had to keep all of my stuff inside because she was kind of not so happy with me. But yeah, but I still feel sorry for her because it's just all she wants is a mate. So that's that for now. Okay, so after that, I actually managed while I was in Brazil. I somehow managed to get hired for another job in Costa Rica via email. I never actually spoke to anyone on the phone about this job. And they were like, yeah, sure, we're going to hire you. You just need to show up in San Jose, Costa Rica on this day, at this time, at this hotel, and someone will meet you. So I got a ticket to Costa Rica, and I showed up at the designated time and place, and sure enough, somebody met me, and they took me off to the field station. But now, I'm like, what was I thinking? That's crazy. But it turned out to be fine. Again, fine. And so I was working in Tortuguero. That's on the Caribbean coast here of Costa Rica. This is the town of Tortuguero. Tortuguero, again, a very small town. Tortuguero is only accessible by boat or plane. There are no roads that go to Tortuguero. Those of you who are coming on the Costa Rica trip in the spring, we are going to Tortuguero. I'm very excited. I haven't been there since this time, and it's a pretty cool place. One thing that's really cool about Tortuguero is there's a lot of old growth rainforest. So I'm being a goofball, but it's a nice tree. And so what I was doing there was another banding job, and that was pretty cool because you get to catch all kinds of really interesting tropical birds that you never catch anywhere else. Hummingbirds, lots of different species of hummingbirds. These are mannequins. People who are in my behavioral ecology class, we talked a lot about mannequins. But very cool birds there. There's some quirks about living in the rainforest. You have a lot of visitors. So these are the poison dart frog. They're pretty common in the forest there. This is our salsa katydid. He pretty much lived on top of the salsa bottle on the table in the dining area. And he was always there. And he would go like this. So here's our salsa katydid. Yeah, so a lot of those guys. There was also, the other thing that was happening at the research station where I was is that there's a major sea turtle breeding colony there. That's why it's called Tortuguero. Tortuguero is the place of the turtles, basically. So, and when I was there were two species of turtles that were breeding. This is a leatherback turtle and a green turtle. It's kind of hard to get a sense of scale here. These are leatherback turtle tracks. The tracks are like this wide. It's like someone drove a golf cart up the beach. These guys are huge, really, really enormous turtles. Something that each of them, namely jaguars. So these are jaguar prints. I unfortunately did not get to see a jaguar, but I was friends with all the turtle biologists who are out there every night looking for the turtles when they come ashore at night to lay their eggs. And so the turtle biologists would go out and they'd walk up and down the beach all night long looking for turtles who are laying their eggs. And a lot of times they would walk up the beach and they'd turn around and walk back down the beach, and there would be their footprints, and on top of their footprints would be jaguar prints. So they were there a lot. Jaguars can kill and eat a leatherback sea turtle. An adult leatherback is just under a ton. So jaguars are incredibly powerful predators. It's pretty amazing that they can take down animals that large. We had other predators. These pictures are, hopefully you can see them. This is a grass snake. It's a little bit bright in here. I was watching a hummingbird, because I'm a bird person. Watching a hummingbird is hovering above the leaves, and all of a sudden, this snake leaps up, grabs the hummingbird I was watching out of the air, and starts to eat it. So in this picture, it's hard to tell, but these are the feathers of the hummingbird sticking out of its mouth. Here it's got it most of the way down, and then here he's about ready to slither off. And this whole process took about 30 seconds. I just happened to have my camera on me. I'm like, it ate the hummingbird! So that was pretty awesome. And actually the herpetologists that I was working with, because I was working with all these sea turtle people. I wasn't working with them, but I was living with these sea turtle people. And they're like, you see more snakes than anyone I know. I'm like, oh. So they were like, okay, Claire, what snakes did you see today? Okay, so actually, while I was in Brazil and Costa Rica, I was applying to graduate school. This is the end of my first year after being graduated, and I did not get in anywhere. I applied to 5 or 6 places and did not succeed. And I had told my boss from Alabama that if I didn't get into grad school, I would come back. And I didn't. Tip. If you want to go to grad school in evolutionary ecology, and this is different from if you want to go into the med sci, you apply to the lab of a professor who you think is whose research you think is interesting. You do not apply to the grad school, because you will not get in unless there's a professor who wants to take you. In the med sci, that's different. In the med sci, there are programs where you apply to the grad school and then you rotate through different labs and then pick one. But no one told me that. So I didn't know what I was doing, so I applied to the grad schools and I didn't get anywhere. So I went back to Alabama, which turned out to be a good thing, because that is where I met my husband. This is this hairy guy here. I don't have any other slides from Alabama because we already talked about that. So then, after Alabama, so I'm now going into my second full year as a field biologist. The next thing that I did was I worked up in Indiana on a project. This is a winter project tracking hawks. So we would catch hawks, put radio transmitters on them, and then drive around all day long. This isn't actually me or someone I know. I didn't have a picture of this, so I had to get one. But we drive around all day long in a, car with your arm out the window holding one of these antennas that picks up the signal from the hawk. So you're driving along, up and down roads, over and over again, trying to pinpoint exactly where the hawk is at. Maybe once a week you get to see one, but most of the time you're like, okay, well, it's somewhere over in that field. And of course, if you're driving up and down rural roads with an antenna out the window in rural Indiana, you get a little bit of interesting interactions. We had a big sign on the side of the car that said, Hawk Tracker, with a picture of a bird. My most common interaction was, what you tracking, deer? I'm like, no, hawks. Yeah, but then there was the guy who thought that I was trying to record his telephone calls, and chased me down on his ATV to yell at me. And I'm like, I'm not recording your telephone calls. I don't care about your telephone calls. But yeah, so every once in a while you get to see one of these sharp-shinned hawks. They're a bird-eating predator, so see them eating things like starlings, and you finally find one of these hawks, and it's got a starling, and it's trying to kill the starling. It's kind of big for a sharp-shinned hawk, so they're going trying to keep as far away from it as they possibly can, and trying to get it to die. Die! So they're kind of fun. All right, after Indiana, I then went to Louisiana, working for the same people who I worked for in Alabama. It was a pretty good gig. The place where I worked no longer exists. It was right here. This is where Hurricane Rita came ashore. So I think it's pretty much gone. There's not really anything left. But I was working in Johnson's Bayou, right there on the Louisiana coast. Again, trapping a lot of birds, some really pretty ones. This is a painted bunting. But we were right behind a refinery. We would actually park in the parking lot of the oil refinery. And then we'd have to sign in, because if the oil refinery blew up, they wanted to know that we were there, so they could look for us and make sure that we didn't get blown up. And then we'd go off into the woods behind the oil refinery. But I said good accent.